Welcome back. We're so thrilled to have you joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah, really excited to get into this one.
To start things off today, I want you to picture a number in your head.
Okay.
Think about the digital economy, specifically the platform OnlyFans.
Right. The creator economy, boom.
Exactly. Since 2019, over $5 billion has been paid out to creators on that platform.
5 billion. That's a staggering number.
It's massive. But there is a statistic we found in today's source material regarding how that money is actually distributed, and it's wild.
It really reframes the whole thing.
33% of that massive accumulation of wealth is hoarded by just the top 1% of creators.
The top 1%.
Right. And the author we're looking at today describes this not as some, triumph of modern independence.
But as a brutal digital feudal system.
Yes, a feudal system masquerading as empowerment.
It is a striking framing of the data, and it perfectly sets the stage for the architecture of the arguments we're going to be exploring today.
Before we get into the thick of it, though, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening.
It really helps us out.
It does. It ensures we can keep bringing you these intense analyses. So today's deep dive is going to be an extensive, unflinching review of a highly provocative new ebook.
Highly provocative is probably putting it mildly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And if you want to read the source material for yourself, and we always encourage you to go directly to the source to draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely. Read it yourself.
You can check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy it. You should also definitely follow the author, Conrad Reicher, over on Substack at Conrad Reicher.
But the title of the book alone is a lot to process.
It is. It's titled Women Want Impossibility, Fried Ice Reluctant Mothers.
Quite the title.
Our mission for this deep dive is to thoroughly unpack the author's intense, completely unapologetic worldview.
Which is deeply rooted in evolutionary psychology.
Right, combined with a rather scorching critique of modern cultural institutions.
But before we dive in, we need to establish some firm ground rules for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Because we are dissecting the substance of these arguments, we have to acknowledge that this book is explicitly written for a very specific demographic.
It is tailored for a red-pilled men's rights activist audience.
Right, a demographic often referred to broadly as the manosphere.
So because of this, the text contains highly politically charged views.
Very charged. Regarding feminism, what the author terms cultural Marxism and modern gender dynamics.
So we must make it explicitly clear right now.
We are not taking sides here.
At all.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Our goal in this deep dive is strictly to impartially report, analyze, and synthesize the arguments exactly as they are presented in the source text.
We're here to help you understand the mechanics of the author's worldview, how these specific arguments are constructed, and what fundamental premises they rely on.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the title itself, specifically the concept of fried ice.
It's the core metaphor of the entire book.
It seems to be. But how exactly does the author use a physical impossibility to describe the modern dating market?
Well, the author uses that physical impossibility to illustrate what he views as a fatal contradiction in modern female expectations.
Because you can't fry ice.
Exactly. You cannot fry ice. The moment you apply the heat of a frying pan, the ice melts and ceases to be ice.
Right.
Riker uses this to argue that modern women are demanding an absolute impossibility from men.
How so?
According to his premise, a woman today wants a man who possesses the raw, terrifying dominance of a marauding warlord.
The quintessential alpha traits.
Exactly. But she simultaneously demands that this exact same man instantly tuck himself into a submissive, safe, predictable provider role the moment she requires it.
Those being the beta traits.
Right, so she wants the inherent danger of the warlord and the sanitized safety of the domesticated provider occupying the exact same physical body.
That seems like a massive paradox.
It is.
How does he explain where this demand comes from? I mean, is it purely sociological, or does he dig into biology?
What's fascinating here is how Riker grounds this demand in an evolutionary mismatch.
It's okay.
He draws heavily on the work of David Buss, one of the foundational figures of evolutionary psychology.
I know Buss studied human mating strategies across a ton of different cultures.
Dozens of them, yeah. Buss found that, evolutionarily speaking, female mating strategies have historically been dualistic.
And Riker bluntly refers to this as the alpha flex, beta buck strategy, right?
He does, yes.
Let me make sure I'm following the mechanics of that dualistic strategy. He's saying that throughout human history, women essentially had two different evolutionary imperatives running at the exact same time.
That is the core of the evolutionary psychology argument he employs. Evolutionarily, females sought out the strongest, most dominant, and often most aggressive males for genetic propagation.
That's the alpha.
Right. The biological imperative was to secure the strongest possible genes for the offspring so they could survive in a harsh environment.
But those highly aggressive dominant males aren't historically known for sticking around to raise kids.
Or reliably providing resources, no. Therefore, the secondary strategy was to seek out reliable, agreeable, perhaps less physically dominant males for resource provision, security, and long-term child rearing.
And that is the beta.
Exactly.
So the friction, as Riker argues, is that society has now pathologized the very traits that women are evolutionarily wired to desire for that first imperative.
Yes.
Traits like stoicism, assertiveness, physical strength, risk-taking.
Are frequently labeled as toxic masculinity in the public sphere today.
It sounds like he's saying there is a massive short circuit happening between what society tells women they should want and what millions of years of evolution tells their nervous systems to want.
Riker posits that this short circuit creates profound cognitive dissonance. You have a situation where the men that women are biologically driven to desire are socially discarded as dangerous or toxic.
Right.
Meanwhile, the men they are instructed by modern institutions to date
The agreeable, safe, egalitarian providers.
are secretly despised on a biological level for being weak.
Wow.
Riker points out that you cannot legislate away millions of years of evolutionary programming. When a society attempts to force men and women into identical, interchangeable roles, it violates that ancient programming.
So men just check out.
Men become unmotivated because their traditional roles as protectors and conquerors are deprecated, and women become miserable because they are fighting their own innate biological desires.
And he argues this leads to a complete psychological breakdown in the mating market.
A total breakdown, yeah.
He uses a really interesting pop culture phenomenon to highlight this exact contradiction. He brings up 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, it's a very specific example.
I read that and immediately wondered how a romance novel fits into a critique of evolutionary biology.
Well, it serves as his primary piece of evidence for exposing the hypocrisy of modern cultural demands. Riker points out the massive disparity between what women say they want in the public sphere and what they consume in private.
Right. He looks at corporate culture, which insists that women are traumatized by aggressive male energy and demand absolute safety, trigger warnings, and sanitized interactions in the workplace.
Yes.
Yet, 50 Shades of Grey.
A book essentially about a dominant, brooding billionaire who frequently bypasses verbal consent to aggressively take what he wants.
Sold over 150 million copies globally to that exact same demographic.
Riker uses that data point to argue that the primal contradiction is undeniable. He states that women demand sanitized safety in the workplace because it allows them to extract resources without threat or competition.
Okay.
But in the bedroom, their biological fantasy reverts entirely to the dominant, unapologetic alpha.
Riker claims that modern institutions are trying to sell the lie that men and women are identical blank slates.
But because biology doesn't care about ideology, the result is a society demanding fried ice.
Women are demanding that men be aggressive conquerors in the sheets and docile servants in the streets.
And then blaming the men when the ice inevitably melts.
When the aggressive man refuses to be docile, or the docile man fails to be aggressive.
Exactly, causing the relationship to fail.
It sounds like a completely unwinnable scenario for the modern man under this framework.
It's presented as entirely unwinnable.
Because if he acts like the dominant alpha, he is socially ostracized, potentially fired from his job, and labeled toxic.
And if he acts like the egalitarian beta, he is sexually rejected and friend-zoned.
So how does Riker explain how society arrived at this point? I mean, he doesn't just blame biological confusion. He traces this back to a very specific historical and philosophical shift, doesn't he?
He does. Riker doesn't believe this shift happened organically. He outlines a deliberate historical strategy.
Tracing the philosophical roots of this dynamic back over a century to the Frankfurt School.
This is where his critique moves from evolutionary biology into political history.
The Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
He specifically points to George Lukács, a Hungarian Marxist writing around 1919, and later figures like Herbert Marcuse. I need a bit of an explanation here. How do Marxist thinkers from early 20th century Europe connect to the modern dating market and the concept of fried ice?
To understand Riker's argument, we have to look at the historical pivot these thinkers made.
Okay.
Traditional Marxism was entirely economic. The theory was that the working class would rise up and seize the means of production from the capitalists.
Standard class warfare.
Exactly. But by the early to mid 20th century, these specific thinkers, Lukács, Marcuse, and others in the Frankfurt School, realized that traditional economic revolutions were failing in the West.
Why?
Because the Western working class was simply too prosperous and comfortable to violently overthrow the system.
So Riker asserts they changed tactics.
Yes. If you cannot dismantle Western civilization through economics, you dismantle it through cultural subversion.
And that involves targeting the family unit.
Primarily the family unit, yes. Riker points specifically to Herbert Marcuse's book, Eros and Civilization.
What was the thesis there?
Marcuse argued that Western capitalist society requires the repression of human sexual instincts to function. People have to delay gratification, work hard, and form stable families to build wealth and maintain the capitalist structure.
So Marcuse theorized that if you could unleash those repressed sexual instincts,
If you could promote pure hedonism and dismantle traditional moral structures,
the entire capitalist system would collapse under the weight of its own liberated desires.
that's the argument.
So Riker is arguing that this wasn't just a cultural shift toward free love in the 1960s. It was a deliberate ideological weapon.
He refers to this strategy as the long march through the institutions.
That phrase is central to his thesis.
It is. The strategy wasn't to seize the factories. It was to quietly seize the means of communication and meaning-making.
Academia, the media, the entertainment industry, the legal system.
By slowly capturing these institutions from the inside, Riker argues they could rewrite the cultural operating system of the West over several generations,
And the primary target was always the nuclear family.
which Riker views as the fundamental building block of Western civilization and the ultimate fortress against state overreach.
Because if you can reframe traditional complementary gender roles as oppressive, you create a massive wedge between men and women.
Exactly.
And the text places a huge emphasis on what has happened to the education system as a direct result of this long march.
He uses a very aggressive phrase for this.
Yeah, the castration of education. What exactly does he mean by that?
He uses that term to describe what he views as a deliberate, systematic lowering of academic standards to accommodate ideology over objective truth.
According to Riker, the modern university has ceased to be a place of rigorous learning and debate.
Instead, it has become a mechanism for ideological conformity.
He argues that difficult empirical subjects, things like advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering, which require objective right and wrong answers, are being actively replaced or watered down.
He links those objective empirical pursuits to what he considers inherently masculine analytical traits.
And he claims they are being pushed aside in favor of grievance studies and feminist critique.
To ground this claim, he uses a specific real-world example, the Equity in Mathematics Initiative in California.
I remember reading about that. The initiative attempted to remove advanced tracking and accelerated math classes in public schools.
Riker points out that the underlying rationale, whether stated explicitly or not, was that certain demographics, particularly boys, were visibly outperforming others in these accelerated tracks.
He views this as a horrifying trade-off, sacrificing actual objective competence just to maintain the superficial appearance of equality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker is arguing that this ideological capture signals the death of meritocracy itself.
Right.
He posits that men are inherently hierarchical creatures. Evolutionarily and sociologically, men organize themselves and prove their worth to the tribe and to women through competition, risk-taking, and demonstrated competence.
When modern institutions replace merit-based systems with diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracies,
EI, yeah.
they are not just changing hiring practices. They are systematically dismantling the primary mechanism men use to establish their value in society.
And he warns that there's a terrifying physical cost to this ideological shift.
It's not just about hurt feelings on a college campus or complaining about corporate HR policies.
No, he provocatively points to catastrophic infrastructure failures, citing the Baltimore Bridge collapse as a potential symptom of this disease.
It is a controversial leap, but it illustrates his core fear. Riker attributes potential systemic failures in scenarios like that to institutional hiring practices that prioritize demographic metrics and diversity quotas over demonstrated structural engineering expertise.
His argument is essentially that when you are building a civilization, the physics of a suspension bridge do not care about your DEI quotas.
Gravity doesn't care about your grievance studies degree.
If a society prioritizes ideological conformity over objective, ruthless competence, the bridges will eventually fall.
This systemic shift from meritocracy to ideological bureaucracy culminates in what Riker terms the gynocentric Leviathan.
This is perhaps the most crucial political concept in his framework.
The gynocentric Leviathan. I know he's referencing Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, the concept of the absolute, all-powerful state. But how does he apply gynocentric to it?
Let's break down how he ties the economic and the cultural arguments together here. Riker argues that by successfully dismantling the nuclear family, pushing women en masse into the workforce, and relentlessly demonizing male authority in the home, a massive power vacuum was created.
And the Leviathan has essentially stepped into that vacuum to replace the husband.
It becomes what he calls the daddy state.
So women begin to look to the government for the security, financial provision, and physical protection that was historically provided by a husband within a marriage structure.
Exactly that dynamic. But the insidious part, according to Riker's thesis, is the funding mechanism for this daddy state.
Right. Who pays for it?
He asserts that this expansive government apparatus is funded overwhelmingly by the tax dollars of the very men it is busy demonizing.
Male labor, ingenuity, and capital are extracted via taxation to subsidize a massive dependent class.
Meanwhile, the men themselves are treated as a disposable utility.
He uses a really brutal analogy for this. He calls it a plantation, where the crops you break your back to harvest are used to feed the guard dogs that bite you.
It's a vivid image.
You are laboring to fund the very system that actively works against your interests. And if the daddy state is the overarching structure, Riker argues that the legal system is its enforcement arm.
He is particularly scathing when it comes to family court.
The legal matrix is where Riker believes the gynocentric Leviathan bears its teeth. He describes the family court system not as a venue for justice or conflict resolution, but as an industrialized machine designed to grind men into dust and extract their resources.
He brings up a piece of legislation that a lot of people haven't heard of before.
The 1986 Bradley Amendment. Can you explain what that is and why Riker views it as such a catastrophic turning point for men's rights?
The Bradley Amendment is a U.S. federal law that mandates that child support assessments become absolute judgments the moment they are due.
Okay.
What this means in practice, and what Riker focuses on, is that it turned child support arrears into a debt that can never be retroactively modified or discharged in bankruptcy, regardless of the circumstances.
So if a man loses his job or is severely injured and physically cannot work, the debt continues to compound automatically.
That is Riker's point of contention. It has no statute of limitations, and crucially, it requires no jury trial to enforce the penalties.
Riker's interpretation of this is chilling. He claims the Bradley Amendment essentially reestablished debtors' prisons in the United States, specifically targeting men.
If you fall behind on these compounding payments, even due to circumstances completely outside your control, the state can suspend your driver's license, revoke your passport, cancel your professional licenses, and ultimately throw you in a physical prison.
All without the constitutional protection of a jury trial.
He argues this legally reduces a father to nothing more than a biological ATM. It strips him of his fundamental rights while endlessly extracting his resources under the threat of state violence.
And he points out that it's a trap. If a man tries to fight for custody, to maintain a physical presence in his children's lives against the wishes of a hostile ex-partner, the system defaults to painting him as aggressive, controlling, or intrusive.
The rules are written to ensure he loses his children and his money.
Family court is his primary target, but he also examines how this legal bias operates outside of marriage, specifically looking at college campuses.
He unpacks the history of Title IX enforcement, focusing intensely on the 2011 Dear Colleague letter issued by the Obama administration's Department of Education.
What exactly did that letter change? I know it overhauled how colleges handle sexual misconduct, but what were the actual mechanics of the legal shift?
The directive mandated a fundamental change of the standard of evidence. It required colleges and universities to adjudicate sexual misconduct and assault cases using a preponderance of the evidence standard, rather than the traditional clear and convincing standard.
Let's do an ELI 5 on preponderance of the evidence. What does that actually mean in a hearing?
A preponderance of the evidence basically means 50.1% likely. It is the lowest possible burden of proof in the legal realm.
Meaning, if a campus tribunal decides it is just slightly more likely than not that an offense occurred, they must find the accused guilty.
Riker argues that this functionally stripped male students of their constitutional right to due process.
It allowed young men to be expelled, have their academic records permanently scarred, and have their futures ruined based on mere accusations.
Often without the right to cross-examine their accuser or see the evidence against them.
He claims this legal shift was implemented specifically to accommodate what he calls female irrationality and to weaponize the concept of safety.
And safety is a key word that Riker dissects meticulously. He calls out what he terms the safety delusion.
He argues there is a pervasive societal narrative amplified by the media and feminist theory that women live in constant paralyzing terror of male violence simply by existing in the world.
But he pushes back on that narrative using hard data. It's interesting how he leverages statistics from the Bureau of Justice to build his case that this narrative is entirely inverted.
He isolates the objective statistics on violent crime to dismantle the safety delusion. The data consistently shows that men are vastly more likely to be the victims of violent crime than women.
Men are overwhelmingly the victims of homicide, aggravated assault, and robbery.
Men make up the vast majority of workplace fatalities. Men suffer significantly higher rates of successful suicide.
Yet, as Riker points out, all the societal empathy, all the institutional resources, and all the legal protections are funneled entirely toward women.
Men are the ones dying in the streets, but society is organized around ensuring women feel comfortable.
Riker argues that this narrative of perpetual female unsafety is a calculated tool. It is used to justify endless government intrusion, the creation of DEI bureaucracies, and the enslavement of men as protectors and providers.
Even though men are statistically navigating a much more dangerous reality.
Facing this systemic, institutional, and legal bias, Riker offers strategic advice for his reader. He frames the daily existence of the modern man as a conflict between the logic of chaos versus the stoic container.
The logic of chaos. He uses some very specific terms to describe how this chaos operates in conversation and media. He talks about word salad and Kafka traps.
Let's break those down.
Yeah, what is a Kafka trap?
A Kafka trap, named after the surreal, oppressive bureaucracy in Franz Kafka's novels, is a rhetorical nightmare. It is a logical fallacy where your denial of a crime or a character flaw is taken as absolute proof of your guilt.
Like if someone accuses you of being inherently sexist and you reply, "I'm not sexist, I treat everyone equally."
The response in a Kafka trap is, the fact that you are so blind to your own privilege that you can't even see your sexism is proof of how deeply sexist you actually are.
Precisely the mechanic. You cannot win.
If you agree, you're guilty. If you deny it, your denial proves your guilt.
Riker states that modern discourse, heavily influenced by critical theory, is dominated by these Kafka traps and word salad.
Academic gibberish designed to sound sophisticated and oppressed without actually conveying any objective truth.
So what is the defense mechanism against a system that operates like that?
Riker argues that you cannot reason with chaos. He posits that order is inherently masculine and chaos is inherently feminine.
Attempting to apply logic to a purely emotional, chaotic state is like trying to fry ice.
Therefore, his advice to men is to become the stoic container.
Do not engage with the irrationality.
Yeah.
If you try to argue with a Kafka trap, you validate the premise of the chaos.
Your job is to maintain absolute frame control. You have to be the rock that the waves of emotion crash against without moving an inch.
You lead without asking for permission, you accept no double binds, and you rely entirely on your own unyielding logic and demonstrated competence.
Because the institutional system is absolutely not going to save you.
This stoicism, Riker argues, is particularly necessary when observing the fallout of these cultural shifts on women themselves.
This is where the book shifts from legal analysis to a deeply critical, unapologetic look at modern female life choices and the corporate feminist narrative.
He explores what he calls the womb of regret and the beauty and the beast dialectic.
The womb of regret. That is a brutal phrase.
He introduces the concept of the reluctant mother, which is his critique of the modern corporate power woman.
Riker argues that modern feminism has sold women a catastrophic biological lie.
The idea that climbing the corporate ladder and sending emails for a Fortune 500 company is a fulfilling substitute for family formation.
He points back to the unforgiving biological reality of the sexual marketplace. Riker notes that human biology operates on a strict, finite timeline that completely ignores corporate HR manuals, girl boss mantras, and progressive ideologies.
He argues that women are encouraged to spend their 20s and early 30s, their years of peak fertility and peak physical attractiveness, prioritizing their careers.
They're told to outcompete men in a high-stress corporate environment.
But Riker argues that this environment is deeply antithetical to female biology. He uses the medical term post-pill amenorrhea.
Can we explain what that is and how he applies it here?
Sure. Amenorrhea is the absence of menstruation. Post-pill amenorrhea specifically refers to the failure of the menstrual cycle to return after discontinuing hormonal birth control.
However, Raker uses the concept to describe the sheer physiological and psychological shutdown that occurs when women endure chronic, masculine-style stress.
The stress of trying to dominate a corporate hierarchy raises cortisol levels, which can physically shut down the reproductive system.
So his argument is that by age 35, this woman has the prestigious resume, the corner office, and the luxury apartment. But she is facing a sterile reality.
Her peak fertility is gone. The high-value men she desires are looking for younger, more fertile women, and she is left staring at the wall.
And this panic, Riker notes, fuels a massive predatory industry. He delves into the freeze your eggs phenomenon.
Describing it not as a triumph of medical science, but as a multi-billion-dollar scam that preys on the desperation of these aging corporate women.
He looks at the actual statistics of egg freezing, which are startlingly grim. Clinics market these expensive, physically grueling hormonal procedures as an insurance policy.
They sell the false hope that you can simply hack your biological clock by putting your eggs in liquid nitrogen and dealing with it in your 40s.
But Riker points out that the live birth rates from frozen eggs are incredibly low.
He argues that biology does not negotiate with technology, and this pursuit of fried ice, wanting to be the fiercely independent boss while expecting biology to wait for you, ends in bitter regret.
We must also address one of the most highly controversial sections of the text regarding how women manage reproductive consequences.
As a reminder, we are impartially reporting the author's arguments to understand his worldview.
Riker takes a very aggressive stance on the topic of abortion, linking it to what he calls the Lilith effect.
The text argues that social media and modern culture have completely normalized abortion.
Riker claims it is no longer treated as a tragic, rare medical necessity, but has been rebranded as a casual self-care ritual.
He references the ancient archetype of Lilith, the autonomous, childless sexual rebel who rejects motherhood and subverts the natural order.
Riker argues that modern women are actively encouraged by the culture to outsource the consequences of their hedonism.
He claims they prioritize lifestyle, convenience, travel, career, social status over human life, all while framing the destruction of that life as a brave act of empowerment.
And he connects this directly back to his concept of the daddy state and the extraction of male resources.
He argues that women outsource the morality and the financial burden of this choice to the political sphere. They demand that the state fund organizations like Planned Parenthood using tax dollars.
In his view, this effectively forces men to financially subsidize the destruction of their own potential offspring while simultaneously being lectured by the culture about toxic masculinity and male privilege.
It is a very stark combative framing of the issue. He then contrasts this perceived female autonomy and lack of accountability with the intense behavioral policing of men.
To illustrate this, he brings up a foundational concept from evolutionary biology, Bateman's principle.
I found this part fascinating because it suddenly pivots to entomology. He starts talking about a study from 1948 involving fruit flies.
How does an experiment on insects from the 1940s connect to modern corporate HR departments or Twitter dynamics?
It sounds like a massive leap, but it is a pivotal connection in Riker's framework. Angus Bateman was a geneticist who placed male and female fruit flies in vials to observe their mating habits.
What he discovered became foundational. He found that male reproductive success is highly variable.
A few dominant males mate constantly and produce many offspring, while a large percentage of males don't mate at all.
Female reproductive success, on the other hand, is remarkably uniform. Almost all females mate, but they do not produce more offspring by mating with multiple partners.
So the biological baseline is that males are hardwired to compete fiercely for access, and females are hardwired to act as the choosy filters, selecting only the top-tier winners of that competition.
That is the evolutionary reality Bateman established. Riker applies this biological choosiness to human sexual selection to relentlessly mock the modern male ally or white knight.
He paints a picture of these men often found in corporate HR departments, in academia, or performing apologies on social media who constantly suppress their own biological masculine drives.
They perform acts of submission, hoping to gain social approval and covertly sexual access from women.
But according to the evolutionary framework Riker is employing, this strategy is fundamentally flawed and pathetic.
Women are biologically wired to desire strength, dominance, and competence, the traits that win the competition.
By castrating their own spirit, apologizing for their masculinity, and acting as sycophants, these soft boys are actually rendering themselves sexually repulsive to the very women they are trying to appease.
Riker bluntly states they end up in the friend zone, acting as a eunuch guarding the harem. They provide the emotional support and validation while the women continue to chase and sleep with the dominant alphas who treat them with disdain.
Riker calls this the beauty and the beast dialectic. Women will always choose the dangerous beast over the safe, apologizing eunuch.
So, if the legal system is the stick enforcing this dynamic, what is the carrot?
That brings us to how Riker views modern technology's role in exacerbating all of these biological mismatches. He dedicates a huge portion of the book to what he calls the electronic coven and the parasitic economy.
This is where Riker analyzes the intersection of ancient neurology and modern algorithms. He explores how technology has hijacked human mating hardware, beginning with the concept of the digital siren and the travel girl paradox.
He tells a highly specific, almost tragic anecdote about a woman who literally sells her reliable, paid-off Honda Civic.
She sells her only means of tangible independence to fund an eat-pray love-style retreat in Bali.
She is convinced that posting highly curated, filtered bikini photos in exotic locations will launch her career as a digital influencer.
But she returns months later heavily in debt with a cracked phone screen and completely devoid of any real-world relationships or marketable skills.
She sacrificed tangible stability to chase the phantom of digital clout.
Riker explains the neurology behind why she would make such an irrational choice, breaking down the validation loop.
Evolution wired the female brain to be hypersensitive to social cues, reputation, and status within the tribe.
In small, ancient hunter-gatherer communities, social approval was not just about ego, it was essential for physical survival. If the tribe exiled you, you died.
But social media platforms have weaponized this ancient circuitry. They replaced the nuanced, real-world approval of a physical village with the binary instant dopamine hit of a like or a follow.
Riker points out that every notification triggers a neurochemical release in the brain that is identical to substance abuse.
It locks the user into a compulsive, unending cycle of seeking validation from thousands of anonymous strangers. It replaces real community and real relationships with an electronic coven.
This dynamic creates a societal-scale narcissistic injury. Think about the implications for the dating market.
No real flesh and blood man, a man who has flaws, who gets tired, who has bad days, can possibly compete with the curated, filtered, mathematically perfected fantasy of the digital suitor.
Or the dopamine rush of thousands of men providing validation online. The market for intimacy becomes entirely unmoored from reality.
To illustrate just how absurd and degraded this digital marketplace has become, Riker brings up the Belle Delphine example.
For those who don't remember this bizarre internet moment, Belle Delphine was an internet personality who famously bottled her used bathwater, put it in small jars, and sold it online for $30 a pop.
And it sold out instantly to thousands of eager male buyers.
Riker views this not merely as clever, eccentric commerce, but as a profound ritual humiliation of the modern man.
It proves, in his eyes, that the marketplace has degraded into a fetishistic absurdity, where lonely, desperate men are willing to bid hard-earned capital for the mere vapor of a woman's existence.
And he lays the blame for this massive parasitic wealth transfer squarely at the feet of the legal framework governing the internet.
Specifically, he targets Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Let's do a quick breakdown of what Section 230 actually is and why Riker hates it so much.
Section 230 is a piece of U.S. legislation passed in 1996. The core of the law states that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider.
In simple terms, it provides legal immunity to tech platforms.
If a user posts something illegal or defamatory on Twitter or Facebook, the user is liable, but the platform cannot be sued for hosting it.
It was originally meant to protect free speech and allow the early internet to grow without companies being sued into oblivion. But how does Riker argue this specific legal loophole created the modern dating dystopia?
Riker argues that this immunity allows giant tech corporations to operate as unregulated pimps.
Because they face zero liability for the content their users generate, they are free to algorithmically promote and monetize female narcissism and softcore pornography.
They peddle a degraded, hyper-stimulating form of sexuality to desperate men, extracting billions of dollars in ad revenue and subscription fees, while accepting absolutely none of the moral or legal responsibility for the societal decay it causes.
Furthermore, Riker points to the severe physiological damage this digital environment inflicts on women.
He claims that the swipe-right culture of modern dating apps, which encourages endless novelty and exceptionally high partner counts, physically alters the female brain.
He specifically mentions that it actively reduces oxytocin receptor sensitivity.
Oxytocin is colloquially known as the pair bonding hormone, or the cuddle chemical.
It is released during physical intimacy and childbirth, and it is the primary neurochemical driver that allows humans to form deep, long-term emotional attachments.
So Riker is asserting that by constantly seeking novelty on Tinder or Bumble and by engaging in casual hookup culture, modern women are physically, neurochemically burning out their oxytocin receptors.
They are literally damaging their brain's biological ability to sustain a long-term marriage or deeply bond with a husband.
They are engineering a mating deficit within their own biology, making the traditional family structure chemically impossible.
We have covered an immense amount of ground here. We've explored the evolutionary mismatch of fried ice, the Frankfurt School's capture of institutions, the hostile legal matrix of family court, the demographic collapse of the reluctant mother, and the neurochemical exploitation of the electronic coven.
The picture Riker paints is overwhelmingly bleak, almost apocalyptic for the modern man.
Here's where it gets really interesting. With a diagnosis this severe, you would expect him to call for a political revolution.
But he doesn't advocate for political activism at all.
He doesn't tell his readers to go out and protest or form lobbying groups or try to vote to change the laws.
His ultimate solution is total, uncompromising withdrawal. He advocates for a mass male strike.
He draws a direct parallel to the concept of Japanification and the phenomenon of the Japanese herbivore men.
In Japan, a significant portion of young men have simply opted out of the hyper-competitive corporate culture and the demanding dating market, choosing quiet, solitary lives instead.
Riker also connects this to the MGTOW movement, men going their own way here in the West.
If the employment contract of marriage has become a suicide pact, which is exactly how he describes it, given the realities of family court and the Bradley Amendment, the rational actor simply opts out.
Riker says men aren't checking out of society because they are lazy or lack ambition. They are going on strike because the risk of total financial and emotional ruin vastly outweighs the potential reward of a modern relationship.
He calls for men to work only enough to satisfy their own basic needs, actively refusing to generate the surplus tax revenue that funds the gynocentric Leviathan.
To execute this strike, he outlines a highly specific, rigorous protocol. He calls it monk mode.
Let's break down the day-to-day reality of monk mode because it sounds intense.
It is exceptionally intense. Riker prescribes a period of 6 to 12 months of total, uncompromising abstinence.
This means no dating, no using swipe apps, no consuming pornography, no scrolling through Instagram models, and absolutely no frivolous spending or giving a single cent to female content creators on platforms like OnlyFans.
What is the psychological purpose of this extreme isolation?
The goal of monk mode is a radical recalibration of a man's focus and dopamine receptors. Riker argues that modern men are constantly leaking their sexual energy, their attention, and their financial resources into a system that actively hates them.
Monk mode is about violently severing those parasitic attachments. You redirect all that leaked energy into yourself.
It's about aggressive capital accumulation, learning hard, tangible skills that cannot be outsourced or automated, and engaging in rigorous physical conditioning.
You starve the beast by minimizing your taxable income, dropping out of the consumer economy, and rebuilding your physical and mental baseline.
And alongside this physical and financial withdrawal, there is a profound intellectual withdrawal.
Riker calls for a masculine renaissance built entirely on autodidacticism, self-education.
Because he views the modern university as a completely broken, ideologically captured institution that offers nothing but crippling debt and emasculation, he argues the rational man must reject its intellectual authority entirely.
He urges his readers to bypass the modern education system and return directly to the source code of Western civilization, the great books.
He tells them to read Plato to understand ideal forms and justice, read Nietzsche to understand the will to power and the overcoming of societal morality.
Read Darwin to understand the ruthless reality of biological competition.
Read the foundational texts of logic, philosophy, and evolutionary biology on your own time, far away from the influence of a grievance studies professor.
He argues that reading Aristotle and grappling with difficult objective truths actually builds the mind of a free, sovereign man.
Conversely, he views a modern university degree as nothing more than a highly expensive receipt for a 4-year guilt trip.
If we synthesize Riker's ultimate message to his listener, it is a clarion call for absolute personal sovereignty.
He is telling men to explicitly withdraw their consent from a system that views them merely as disposable utilities and walking ATMs.
He instructs them to build an empire in the real world, outside the reach of the Leviathan. Secure your hard-earned capital using trusts, offshore accounts, and asset protection strategies.
And above all, refuse to sign state marriage contracts.
Do not give a hostile third party, the government, the legal power to arbitrarily distribute your life's work. You have to adopt what he calls the frame of steel.
The frame of steel. You stop playing their rigged game and you create your own reality.
You recognize that your life, your labor, and your intellect have value simply because you say they do, not because of your utility to a woman, a corporation, or the state.
This raises an important question when we look at the broader implications of his philosophy.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, sitting here looking at this text and the future it predicts? It brings us to a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Riker argues that human civilization, the cities, the infrastructure, the art, the laws, is a fortress built entirely on the delicate, highly evolved biological push and pull between men and women.
He claims that modern ideology and early technology like social media have already fundamentally severed that connection, leading to the demographic winter and societal decay we are currently witnessing.
Which forces us to consider the fragility of the social contract when biology and technology collide at an even more rapid pace.
Exactly. What happens when the next massive technological leap arrives? We aren't just talking about Instagram filters anymore.
What happens when advanced AI companions or fully immersive photorealistic virtual reality completely remove the need for a physical mating market altogether?
If men can find perfect, flawless fried ice in a virtual environment, a digital partner tailored perfectly to their physical desires and emotional needs, who never ages, never complains, and carries absolutely none of the terrifying legal or financial risks, Riker outlines what happens to society.
Does the gynocentric Leviathan instantly collapse because it loses its tax base and the physical protectors it relies on?
Or does it evolve into something entirely unrecognizable? Perhaps a society managed entirely by Cole's algorithms, while the human population simply stops reproducing and quietly blinks out of existence.
It's a terrifying yet undeniably fascinating thing to mull over.
It really is. It is the ultimate logical conclusion of the trajectory Riker outlines, where technology finally outpaces biology entirely.
Well, that brings us to the end of our incredibly deep analysis of this material.
Before you go, please remember to like and subscribe to the Deep Dive so you never miss an analysis. We rely on your support to keep dissecting these complex topics.
If you want to explore the source material, dive into these arguments firsthand and see how the author constructs these concepts.
Check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Women Want Impossibility, Fried Ice Reluctant Mothers.
And you can follow the author, Conrad Riker, to explore these concepts further directly from the source.
He is at Conrad and Riker on Substack, at Conrad Riker on Twitter, and you can find his video essays at Conrad and Riker on YouTube.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intense exploration.
It's heavy, challenging material, but understanding the diverse and often controversial narratives shaping the undercurrents of our world is absolutely crucial. Stay curious, keep reading, and keep questioning the narratives around you. We'll see you next time.